Hi everybody, I'm Mike Poland, the scientist in charge of the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. This is the monthly update for January 1st of 2022, New Year. It seems like a good time to review what happened over the course of the past year. So I'd like to start this update, before we get into what happened during the month of December, with what happened during the entire year of 2021. And we'll start with seismicity. Now typically there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,500 earthquakes located every year in the Yellowstone region. And we're right about on par with that for 2021. There were about 2,800 earthquakes located during the year. You can see they were scattered throughout the park area with some clusters here and there. There were about 27 swarms of earthquakes. Those are earthquakes that are located in tight clusters in short periods of time. The most noteworthy swarm of the year happened in mid-July, right here beneath Yellowstone Lake. There were over 800 earthquakes that were part of that swarm. That kind of swarm activity is pretty typical of Yellowstone. About 50% of all earthquakes in Yellowstone are part of swarms, and in 2021 it was about 65% of these earthquakes were in swarms. So right about on par with past years of seismicity, with the largest swarm of the year being that mid-July swarm beneath the lake. These are mostly caused by water circulating and interacting with existing faults. There's faults all through the region, so pretty normal for the Yellowstone region. In terms of deformation, we haven't seen big changes in the GPS time series that we look at frequently, but I wanted to show a different type of deformation to review the past year. This is a radar interferogram. It is composed of radar images that are acquired from space, from satellites, and by comparing different images over time, we can get a picture of how the ground is moving. Now this particular image spans September 22nd of 2020 to September 17th of 2021. And we can't get into the winter months because this technique doesn't work when there's snow on the ground, but it works very well looking from summer to summer. The colored fringes you're seeing are showing changes in the elevation of the ground, measured in millimeters to centimeters, so very fine scale changes. So this colored oblong shape in the middle of the caldera, that's showing subsidence of Yellowstone caldera by a few centimeters, about an inch or two, over the course of this past year, from September 2020 to September of 2021. The more colors you see, the more deformation there is, the more subsidence in this case there is. But there's also this very interesting little blob of color here, just on the north side of the caldera, not too far from Norris Geyser Basin. And this actually indicates a small amount, about a centimeter or a centimeter and a half, that's less than an inch, of uplift. And this is very similar to something that was seen in the late 1990s or early 2000s. We're not seeing this on the GPS stations at Norris because the GPS stations are located just north of where that colored blob is, where that uplift is occurring. So we're going to have to keep an eye on this to see whether or not it continues. You can see there's other little blobs here and there about the same size, about the same magnitude, same color sense. And these are atmospheric distortions because atmospheric conditions can cause apparent changes in these interferograms. So we'll have to see if this continues to show up and continues to grow. But it's possible we're seeing a return to the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s behavior of this region just outside of the area that we can see with GPS stations that are continuous working in the Norris area. So even though the caldera has been subsiding as it has been since 2015, there might be a little bit of change in the Norris area. We'll keep an eye on that. Geyser activity was not particularly abnormal during 2021. And of course, the one that everyone likes to talk about is Steamboat Geyser. That has been active since 2018, and 2021 was really no exception, although activity declined just a little. During the year 2021, there were 20 major water eruptions of Steamboat Geyser. Of course, this is the tallest geyser in the world, so it's a very exciting thing to visit, a very exciting thing to see. And in 2018, when it came back to life, there were 32 eruptions. There were 48 eruptions each in 2019 and 2020, but then of course we went back down in 2021. This is a plot of the temperature in the outflow channel of Steamboat Geyser, and each one of these spikes records an eruption. Now you might see a change from the early part of the year to the later part of the year when the temperature really rose, and that's because the temperature sensor had actually been buried earlier in the year by all of the debris coming down from these eruptions. So in May, when we visited the site, we were able to dig the sensor out of all this debris and it started recording more realistic temperatures. Now in terms of the eruptive activity, it was regularly spaced every few weeks or so until we got into the summer. And there were periods in the summer where there was a month and even at one point 2 months between eruptions. There was a 2-month period here between July and September where there were no eruptive activity at all. And then we went back into every couple of weeks or so having eruptions through the end of the year. So Steamboat doesn't quite seem like it's done having eruptive activity. It may continue into 2022, but of course quite a bit reduced from what we saw in 2019 and 2020. All right, well that's sort of the year in review. Now let's talk about the specifics of what happened in December in terms of earthquake and deformation activity.
The University of Utah Seismograph Stations, which is responsible for the operation and analysis of the Yellowstone seismic network, located just 43 earthquakes during the month of December, so a pretty light month for earthquakes in the region. The largest was a magnitude 2.6 that occurred on the eastern side of the park on December 18th, so just a minor earthquake. There was no swarm activity, so well below background levels of earthquake activity during the month of December. Turning to deformation, we've seen trends that have continued since 2015 in the caldera. This is the White Lake GPS station. It's on the east side of the caldera on the Sour Creek Resurgent Dome, and each one of these blue dots represents the data point for a single day. And this spans the last 2 years. Anything trending down in this vertical plot is subsidence and up is uplift. Now we've had these summer bits of uplift or pauses in the overall subsidence, but subsidence has dominated, and these summer pauses are caused by groundwater that percolates into the subsurface and the ground sort of soaks it up like a sponge. So since the end of this past summer, we've seen this continued subsidence. It's occurring at a rate of a couple centimeters, about an inch or so per year, persisting since 2015. If we go to the western side of the caldera and the Mallard Lake Resurgent Dome, this is a GPS site that's located near Old Faithful, and that same subsidence trend continues with these summer interruptions. The signal gets much better here starting in September of 2020 because some trees in the area were cut down to reduce the load of fuel load from potential fire danger, since there was a fire burning near Old Faithful at this time. And you'll see right at the end of the time series here, it looks like there's sudden subsidence. This starts in mid-December, and it coincides with the arrival of a series of large storms in the Yellowstone area. So what we're seeing here is an artifact of heavy snowfall in the region. And finally, moving to the Norris Geyser Basin, we see the same overall pattern. This is outside the caldera, no real deformation. This bit of apparent uplift here in the summer is related to that same sort of groundwater percolation into the subsurface. And then there's this very big subsidence signal right here starting in mid-December. Again, this is due to all of the storms that have hit the Yellowstone region in the second half of December. So this is an artifact that should go away, pop back up once the storms abate and some of that snow lets off. And finally, moving to everyone's favorite geyser, Steamboat Geyser in the Norris Geyser Basin, there was just one eruption here on December 16th in the early morning hours. Now, this is the temperature profile in the outflow channel for Steamboat. All of this spiky activity reflects minor eruptions. There's the major eruption on the 16th, and then we go back to normal daily changes. Of course, very cold at Norris this time of year, below freezing. And then we see this spiky behavior starting up again in the later part of the month. That's signaling that we are headed probably towards another Steamboat eruption. So it's not quite over yet in terms of Steamboat activity. There have only been 20 eruptions this year. That contrasts with 48 eruptions each in 2019 and 2020. But Steamboat looking like it's not quite done yet, perhaps headed towards an eruption sometime in the first part of January.
Well, that does it for the monthly update for January 1st of 2022. I think we can close the book on 2021, and probably most of us are pretty happy about that. Hope that 2022 is a good year for everyone. Please stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.